Cultural program, we have benefited from a 1,000-gallon black drum and fittings and drip hose. This has helped us immensely because where we are located in Southwest St. Elizabeth, it is rather on the dry plains of St. Elizabeth. So you came this afternoon, we got rains and we're grateful for that. But under the normal circumstances, the times are very dry and hot. And so with the assistance where we can just fill our drum, turn it on to water when we want to, when we have our seedlings planted, it will ensure that we have vegetables at all times. Our students are from the lower socioeconomic families, and they usually depend on us for food. 5 days per week, we usually cook for them. And we know that if we have it from our farm, we can take it to them. We know where to find them.
The United Nations is the product of hope. The hope and resolve following the Second World War to move beyond global conflict to global cooperation. Today, our organization is being tested like never before. But the United Nations was made for moments like these. Now more than ever, we need to bring to life the values and principles of the UN Charter in every corner of the world. By giving peace a chance and ending conflicts that jeopardize lives, futures, and global progress. By working to end extreme poverty, reduce inequalities, and rescue the Sustainable Development Goals. By safeguarding our planet, including by breaking our addiction to fossil fuels and kickstarting the renewable energy revolution. And by finally balancing the scales of opportunity and freedom for women and girls and ensure human rights for all. As we mark UN Day, let us renew our hope and conviction in what humanity can achieve when we work as one in global solidarity.
Hi, I'm Gary Canillo, the UN Resident Coordinator here in Jamaica. The UN country team is proud to have supported the completion of Jamaica's voluntary national review under the committed leadership of the government of Jamaica. I want to first thank the team of the Planning Institute of Jamaica and its Director General, Dr. Wayne Henry, for their strategic engagement as together we track Jamaica's implementation and progress towards Agenda 2030. Building on our strong partnership with the PIOJ, the UN country team with RCO leadership worked closely with government to consult, agree, and define the needs for the VNR. With guidance from the Planning Institute, Jamaica's VNR has been enriched with an assessment on the impact of COVID-19 on social protection, tourism, education, and the labor markets, with digitalization as a cross-cutting issue. It contains dedicated chapters of review on SDGs 2, 13, 14, and SDG 15. It includes a thematic report on strengthening the corporate social responsibility framework for the SDGs in Jamaica, as well as an assessment of Jamaica's alignment with the SDGs and recommendations for strengthening local SDG action. The final VNR document, strongly guided by the vision of the Jamaican government, reflects the most up-to-date body of evidence and socioeconomic progress in areas such as climate change development and impacts, the sustainable use of oceans, seas, and marine resources, as well as efforts to protect, restore, and promote sustainable use of Earth. With UN support, this SDG tracking process was also able to embody the views of Jamaican youth through insightful consultations conducted with young people. The end product is a document that we are all extremely proud of. I am particularly happy that the RCO was able to coordinate in its preparation and that we were able to support and ensure that the voices from many different stakeholders, including young Jamaicans, private sector, government, and NGOs, often left behind, are reflected in this report and will be heard at this year's high-level political forum. With the government of Jamaica, we are planning for nationwide dissemination of this VNR through, among many channels, the national launch of a new web-based SDG platform. And in this way, we hope to further inspire and coalesce public engagement around the SDGs. Global events continue to challenge our resolve. This is the time to release the accelerator on our path towards the SDGs. With real commitment, the right policies and investment, strong partnerships, we can make significant progress towards the SDGs. This will, of course, require sharing best practices and challenges, as well as lessons learned, so that all countries around the world can strengthen policies and institutions and mobilize multi-stakeholder support and partnerships. The VNR offers the opportunity to do so. The UN country team, under my leadership, stands ready to work closely with Jamaica and its partners to build and accelerate its progress towards achieving the 2030 agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you to all my doctors then.
Thank you, nurse.
Thanks to the teachers.
Big up the sanitation worker them.
Thank all of you guys.
Thank you.
Big up all of the frontline worker them.
Them deserve a thanks.
Big up the police force.
Thanks for the soldier them.
Big up for the fisherman, man, the farmer. Saying every time.
Thank you to all the frontline workers responding to COVID-19 and keeping the Jamaican economy alive. From your efforts, Jamaica will recover and build forward better. We salute you, our heroes on the front line. We owe you a debt of gratitude. Thank you for your service.
The Joint SDG Fund is committed to strengthening resilience and ending the vulnerabilities of small island developing states. The multiplicity of socioeconomic and environmental vulnerabilities, in addition to the shocks caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, have been detrimental to the island nations, but SIDS are resilient. They are building forward better by developing innovative financing solutions to strengthen the protection of vulnerable groups and creating greener and bluer economies. Sustainable growth will require economic diversification and greater participation from a young, skillful workforce. And to lessen the effects of disasters, access to modern, innovative technologies led by digitization are critical. For economic growth and food production, healthy oceans are vital for the well-being of coastal communities by improving livelihood sectors of fisheries and ecotourism. To secure these smart investments, mobilizing partnerships with the private sector, civil society, and government are fundamental to empowering small island developing states to succeed in reaching the Sustainable Development Goals.
Hi, I'm Charmaine Blair Stewart. I'm a farmer on the PJ Agro Park in St. Thomas. I am a cassava planter. I have seasonal crop of onion, Irish potato, sweet potatoes, and pumpkin.
Since the onset of COVID-19, many female farmers like Charmaine have limited or no access to their usual markets. Many have lost produce valued at thousands of dollars needed to support their families.
Challenge that I face mostly is lack of storage facility. I harvested 23,000 pounds of Irish potato. And of that 23,000 pounds, I sold 3,131 pounds. Other farmers across the country need to market their produce. The produce suffered.
Through the purchase of locally grown produce, the project will create a secure market for rural female farmers while meeting the food and nutrition demands of vulnerable families. These families will receive food care packages that will include locally grown fruits and vegetables. By supporting local supply chains, we are supporting livelihoods, reducing food and nutrition insecurity, and enhancing Jamaica's agricultural response and recovery to COVID-19.
Nothing's a one in a detention room. Pure tension in a detention room. Nothing's a one in a detention room. Detention room. Nothing's a one in a detention room. Pure tension in a detention room. Nothing's a one in a detention room. Detention room.
We are the union crew. Everything we have new.
Teachers lose them cool. We're a boom and cut school.
If we get the money come back in a hurry.
We kick boy in the face so we're not saying sorry.
We cut and go through if we get rich soon.
Push no room. Cause I be about things in a detention room. Be about things in a detention room. Pure tension in a detention room. Nothing's a one in a detention room. Detention.
You know what I can't understand? I can't understand how my own friends did not like my picture on Instagram. So who tell us that we are friends?
You know, to say you're fat girl, not hot girl.
How much time you forgot to tell us to stop posting on Instagram because you're don't ready yet.
You're don't ready
and
yet.
That's a number one. As a matter of fact, boom boom, I'm thirsty. Go get me a little water.
I may want a bag juice.
Hurry up. I can sit next to you?
Sure.
I want to him. Omar, I want to you.
Yo, I'm gonna kill myself, you know, man.
What you say? You're gonna take your precious life because of them two bully there, eh?
All right, I'm gonna tie them up one and kill them.
Then that makes sense to you, Omar? Eh? Come again, man. That makes sense to you?
I sure nobody no trouble you, you know. Them afraid of your mother?
No. Them not afraid of me, nor my mother, but I am a strong girl and me not take foolishness. And furthermore, Duppy, know who, for frighten.
That easy for you, say.
Omar, come and talk to you.
Yo, Sean, the detention room, you mash up thing, you know. So that me a talk about my you know we have whole heap of business to take care of on the road.
Yeah, man, we know what kind of business on the inner.
Yo, Michael, what I'm to you? You always go like you want to come spoil up my thing.
You need to do better, that's all me I tell you.
Do better, that's you say?
Yes, do better.
So you don't think the whole school know where your man I do?
Well, wipe the beam out of your eye first.
Yeah, and you wipe the beam out of your man eye.
You know, say you embarrass me at school, yeah?
So we are try say I know Empress. Yeah, tell me say the expensive here with me by you. You know like them things there? You are going like saying, you know where this come from, you know. Yeah, one. I have some important calls to make, Zane.
This scamming, this bullying, and this loan sharking people. Come on, do better, man.
Yo, to the girl, yeah, man. Yo, in come election, I know what this thing really is about, you know.
You know what this education thing is really about.
Oh, all right. This thing is about making a living.
Money have to make the real way. What am I say?
Money have to make the real way.
Yeah.
I see from money have to make, scamming have to go on. The real way.
Yeah. I see this bullying thing. It's a survival thing, you understand?
Yeah, it's a gangster living. It's a survival thing. And me can't survive without my tribe. Yeah.
Guys, I saw no really want to live.
That's not funny.
No, me can't live so.
Change. Take responsibility now.
Making a choice. Be bold and use your voice. We're tired of the bullying, the scamming and all. Real gangsta living, no make it at all.
Oh no.
Oh no. Make a choice.
In Jamaica, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, FAO, in collaboration with the Jamaica 4-H clubs, is supporting 12 schools to rehabilitate their school gardens. Under the Homegrown School Feeding Program, school meal programs have been linked to local food production. Schools under the program are benefiting from a range of irrigation and production kits and technical guidance to maintain their school gardens. These gardens are a source of fresh fruits and vegetables that help to meet the food and nutrition needs of students. Since the onset of COVID-19, as many schools have remained closed and students have not benefited from the provision of school meals, schools like Newell High School in St. Elizabeth, Jamaica, continue to ensure that their school gardens remain active and can provide students and communities with much-needed local produce. FAO and the Jamaica 4-H clubs are helping some of these schools to ensure that students and community members remain food secure and are able to access locally grown food to promote healthier diets. By rehabilitating and maintaining school gardens, we are helping to create a more inclusive and resilient agri-food system so that we can have better production, better nutrition, a better environment, and a better life for all.
My name is Audrey Ellington, principal of the Newell High School in Southwest St. Elizabeth, Jamaica. In our school garden, we grow mainly vegetables. We have callaloo, corn, pak choy, sweet pepper, hot pepper. We also do escallion, and at times we do cabbage and beetroot. Before COVID, for our school garden, the students would have gotten the chickens to eat. At one time, we also had layers, and so that assisted in our breakfast program, where we usually produce breakfast in the mornings for our students. And on the farm, we also have plantain. And so the plantain was also used for our breakfast program. Since COVID, we have scaled down because the students are not here. But whatever we produce now, community members would purchase. And when teachers come in from time to time, they would also purchase these things. We have not put in back any chickens since COVID, except for when we had students coming back for SBA, then we had to do a batch of birds. And of course, we sold those to community members. But before that, last Christmas, December, we also did packages for our students. And so they also got chickens and whatever else we had on the farm at that time. So whatever we earned, as much as is possible, we used it back on the farm, and some goes into our cash reserve. So with the support from FAO and 4-H under the Homegrown Agricultural Program, we have benefited from a 1,000-gallon black drum and fittings and drip hose. This has helped us immensely because where we are located in Southwest St. Elizabeth, it is rather on the dry plains of St. Elizabeth. So you came this afternoon, we got rains, and we're grateful for that. But under the normal circumstances, the times are very dry and hot. And so with the assistance where we can just fill our drum, turn it on to water when we want to, when we have our seedlings planted, it will ensure that we have vegetables at all times. Our students are from the lower socioeconomic families, and they usually depend on us for food. 5 days per week, we usually cook for them. And we know that if we have it from our farm, we can take it to them. We know where to find them.
United Nations is the product of hope. The hope and resolve following the Second World War to move beyond global conflict to global cooperation. Today, our organization is being tested like never before. But United Nations was made for moments like these. Now more than ever, we need to bring to life the values and principles of the UN Charter in every corner of the world. By giving peace a chance and ending conflicts that jeopardize lives, futures, and global progress. By working to end extreme poverty, reduce inequalities, and rescue the Sustainable Development Goals. By safeguarding our planet, including by breaking our addiction to fossil fuels and kickstarting the renewable energy revolution. And by finally balancing the scales of opportunity and freedom for women and girls and ensure human rights for all. As we mark UN Day, let us renew our hope and conviction in what humanity can achieve when we work as one in global solidarity.
Hi, I'm Gary Canillo, the UN Resident Coordinator here in Jamaica. The UN country team is proud to have supported the completion of Jamaica's voluntary national review under the committed leadership of the government of Jamaica. I want to first thank the team of the Planning Institute of Jamaica and its Director General, Dr. Wayne Henry, for their strategic engagement as together we track Jamaica's implementation and progress towards Agenda 2030. Building on our strong partnership with the PIOJ, the UN country team with RCO leadership worked closely with government to consult, agree, and define the needs for the VNR. With guidance from the Planning Institute, Jamaica's VNR has been enriched with an assessment on the impact of COVID-19 on social protection, tourism, education, and the labor markets, with digitalization as a cross-cutting issue. It contains dedicated chapters of review on SDGs 2, 13, 14, and SDG 15. It includes a thematic report on strengthening the corporate social responsibility framework for the SDGs in Jamaica, as well as an assessment of Jamaica's alignment with the SDGs and recommendations for strengthening local SDG action. The final VNR document, strongly guided by the vision of the Jamaican government, reflects the most up-to-date body of evidence and socioeconomic progress in areas such as climate change development and impacts, the sustainable use of oceans, seas, and marine resources, as well as efforts to protect, restore, and promote sustainable use of Earth. With UN support, this SDG tracking process was also able to embody the views of Jamaican youth through insightful consultations conducted with young people. The end product is a document that we are all extremely proud of. I am particularly happy that the RCO was able to coordinate in its preparation and that we were able to support and ensure that the voices from many different stakeholders, including young Jamaicans, private sector, government, and NGOs, often left behind, are reflected in this report and will be heard at this year's high-level political forum. With the government of Jamaica, we are planning for nationwide dissemination of this VNR through, among many channels, the national launch of a new web-based SDG platform And in this way, we hope to further inspire and coalesce public engagement around the SDGs. Global events continue to challenge our resolve. This is the time to release the accelerator on our path towards the SDGs. With real commitment, the right policies and investment, strong partnerships, we can make significant progress towards the SDGs. This will, of course, require sharing best practices and challenges, as well as lessons learned, so that all countries around the world can strengthen policies and institutions and mobilize multi-stakeholder support and partnerships. The VNR offers the opportunity to do so. The UN country team, under my leadership, stands ready to work closely with Jamaica and its partners to build and accelerate its progress towards achieving the 2030 agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you to all my doctors then.
Thank you, nurse.
Thanks to the teachers. Big up the sanitation worker them.
Thank all of you guys.
Thank you.
Big up all of the frontline worker them.
Them deserve a thanks. Big up the police force.
Thanks to the soldier them.
Big up for the fisherman, the man, the farmer. Saying every time.
Thank you to all the frontline workers responding to COVID-19 and keeping the Jamaican economy alive. From your efforts, Jamaica will recover and build forward better. We salute you, our heroes on the front line. We owe you a debt of gratitude. Thank you for your service.
The Joint SDG Fund is committed to strengthening resilience and ending the vulnerabilities of small island developing states. The multiplicity of socioeconomic and environmental vulnerabilities, in addition to the shocks caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, have been detrimental to the island nations, but SIDS are resilient. They are building forward better by developing innovative financing solutions to strengthen the protection of vulnerable groups and creating greener and bluer economies. Sustainable growth will require economic diversification and greater participation from a young, skillful workforce. And to lessen the effects of disasters, access to modern, innovative technologies led by digitization are critical. For economic growth and food production, healthy oceans are vital for the well-being of coastal communities by improving livelihood sectors of fisheries and ecotourism. To secure these smart investments, mobilizing partnerships with the private sector, civil society, and governments are fundamental to empowering small island developing states to succeed in reaching the Sustainable Development Goals.
Hi, I'm Charmaine Blair Stewart. I'm a farmer on the PJ Agro Park in St. Thomas. I am a cassava planter. I have seasonal crop of onion, Irish potato, sweet potatoes, and pumpkin.
Since the onset of COVID-19, many female farmers like Charmaine have limited or no access to their usual markets. Many have lost produce valued at thousands of dollars needed to support their families.
The challenge that I face mostly is lack of storage facility. I harvested 23,000 pounds of Irish potato. And of that 23,000 pounds, I sold 3,131 pounds. Other farmers across the country need to market their produce. The produce suffered.
Through the purchase of locally grown produce, the project will create a secure market for rural female farmers while meeting the food and nutrition demands of vulnerable families. These families will receive food care packages that will include locally grown fruits and vegetables. By supporting local supply chains, we are supporting livelihoods, reducing food and nutrition insecurity, and enhancing Jamaica's agricultural response and recovery to COVID-19.
Nothing's a one in a detention room. Pure tension in a detention room. Nothing's a one in a detention room. Detention room. Nothing's a one in a detention room. Pure tension in a detention room. Nothing's a one in a detention room. Detention room.
We are the union crew. Everything we have new.
Teachers lose them cool or a boom and cut school.
If we get the money come back in a hurry.
Kick boy in the face so we're not saying sorry.
We cut and go through up to get rich soon.
Frost on a plane, second half to the moon, but not see the street, and not push no room.
Cause I beer bad things in a detention room. Beer bad things in a detention room. Pure tension in a detention room. Nothing's a one in a detention room. Detention room.
You know what I can't understand? I can't understand how my own friends did not like my picture on Instagram. So who tell us that we are friends?
You know, to say you're fat girl, not hot girl.
How much time I forgot to tell you to stop posting on Instagram because you're
advocacy in the RCO. Thank you for staying with us. Let me first apologize for the late start. For those of you who've just joined online or even this afternoon in person, this is the United Nations Jamaica Partnership Forum 2022. We've been having rich dialogue, discussions, networking, building bridges, and making friends, I hope, during the long wait for lunch. And I won't stay in between the next session because we're very excited for it. You may join our conversations online using the handle and hashtag UN Jamaica. This afternoon session will feature 2 key panel discussions, and we'll also have a number of special keynote presentations for you as well. The first focused on financing climate resilience and the blue economy, and the second panel focused on innovative financing to promote circular and creative economies. Are you ready? To introduce our next and our keynote speaker is someone who knows him even more than I do, knows him very well. Please welcome Dr. Gary Conneal.
Thank you so much. What a morning, really. What an exciting way to start our day and to begin these discussions. It is really a pleasure to introduce the next speaker. Dr. Dennis Jean Leon is the 6th president of the Caribbean Development Bank, and he began his career in the throes of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I can tell you his vision has already been felt throughout the region. I first had the pleasure to hear him speak in Costa Rica. And after the presentation, I said, I definitely first, and I'm going to admit this very humbly, I was surprised to hear this from someone who had spent years in the IMF. So shame on me, huh? But his vision, his understanding of our circumstances, the level of ambition, and helping us think through how we could develop new instruments to understand challenges to development was just inspiring. So that same evening, we had dinner together at a Japanese restaurant, I hope you'll remember, and I was hooked. And since then, he shared with me his presentations, his writing,
He's really inspired a lot of my thinking around what we can do in development. So it really is an extreme pleasure to introduce a colleague and a friend with over 30 years of experience in academia and economic development that has served the Global South, and even right here in Jamaica, by the way, where he served as the IMF Senior Resident Representative in Jamaica. So first, welcome back. We're happy to have you, and you have the floor. Welcome.
Thanks much, Gary. At least I recognize some faces that tell me I am not exactly in foreign territory. First, let me acknowledge not just those of you who are here in the room, but equally those who are joining us online. And to state that really it is good to be back in Jamaica, a country I had the privilege of residing in for almost 4, what I like to think of as enjoyable and fulfilling years. It is significant that although I moved away over 10 years ago, when I come back to Jamaica, I land here, my friends say, welcome home. So if you hear me say us, we, our, a lot today, it is because I am speaking to friends and colleagues whom I worked with and continue to work with now for, I want to say, a better Jamaica. It is therefore an honor and a privilege to deliver this address at this partnership forum to mark the 60th anniversary of Jamaica's independence. So let's begin with a little bit of, let's say, reminiscing. At the stroke of midnight on August 5th, some 60 years ago, the Union Jack was ceremoniously lowered and Jamaica's national flag, the black, green, and gold, was raised, signaling the first declaration of independence in the English-speaking Caribbean. And that started a process that was to unfold across the entire region. According to the Handbook of Jamaica, 1962 edition, at that time, there were 1,622,800 persons living in Jamaica. The economic growth was 3.6% per annum. Life expectancy was 64 years, and infant mortality rate was 48.1 per 1,000. Now, I say that to give you the context of where we started, because I want to fast forward this to today, and to start by saying a lot has transpired since then. So considering Jamaica's economic performance as our first point of departure, the average rate of real GDP growth has been much lower than I think we all desired. Indeed, after growing at an average rate of 3.1% during the decade of the 80s, the average real growth fell to 0.4% during the period 1990 to 2020. This partially reflects the impact of a number of shocks, including natural hazard events, the Great Recession, and the COVID-19 pandemic. However, this performance also reflects the decline in traditional exports, such as alumina, bananas, and sugar, the latter two being impacted by the phase out of European trade preferences. At the same time, these traditional exports were not replaced, helping to stymie growth between 1990 and now. The lack of growth in the export sector is symptomatic of a more fundamental issue, which is declining competitiveness and lack of adequate innovation, which prevented the emergence of a dynamic export sector producing more complex goods and services to underpin sustained and inclusive growth. So in recognition of this, in 2013, the government of Jamaica embarked on a systematic effort to improve competitiveness, focusing on institutional and infrastructural upgrades that would lower costs, facilitate investment, and create a healthy ecosystem for internationally competitive and dynamic businesses. Efforts were made to improve logistics infrastructure in a manner that would create stronger linkages between agriculture and manufacturing and tourism. Emphasis was placed on facilitating trade by targeting the institutional and regulatory framework that ultimately helps to determine the dynamism and cost of the business sector. These institutional upgrades included efforts to reduce the time taken to transit items through the port, facilitate the use of movable assets as collateral, allow the ability of labor to negotiate contracts in a flexible manner, and reduce the time taken to register a business. These actions have tilted the export trajectory upward again. Indeed, export growth has averaged 4% in real terms since 2014, but needs to grow much, much faster if this sector is to create a platform for sustained headline growth. Hence, there is much more ground to be covered if the government of Jamaica is to facilitate the expansion and diversity of exports with higher value added that would underpin the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals and the broader aspirations of the people of Jamaica. At the same time, the United Nations Human Development Index shows Jamaica has progressed from 0.659 in 1990 to 0.709 in 2021, an average annual HDI growth of 0.24. And if you know how the HDI index moves, it really is very glacial. And so that has to be a very strong performance for Jamaica. This means, therefore, that in the last 30 years, Jamaica has been among the high-ranked nations with achievements in the three basic dimensions of long and healthy life, access to education, and a decent standard of living, which are the three components that make up the Human Development Index. Similar commendable strides were recorded in social development, with poverty, which was 24.6% of the population in 2013, having declined to an all-time low of 11% in 2019 at the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. This decline coincided with improvements in the macroeconomic conditions, particularly the reining in of inflation and notable reductions in unemployment. In the intervening years, Jamaica also embarked on a social safety net reform program and legislative action to further strengthen the social protection system, which sought to break the vicious cycle of intergenerational poverty through human capital development. The Caribbean Development Bank has been, I dare say, a loyal partner in the efforts to create a dynamic and innovative economy in the past, and will continue to be a partner with the government and people of Jamaica in this regard. In 2014, the bank provided a policy-based loan that supported the government's efforts at achieving fiscal consolidation, competitiveness, growth, and social cohesion. Recognizing the importance of resource mobilization and implementation, CDB also provided grant funding for technical assistance in these areas in 2018. CDB also provided the funding that facilitated the development of Vision 2030, a comprehensive development plan that was based on wide consultation. The problem, though, is in spite of the contrast that I have just painted, where we started in 1962 and where we were around 2020, we cannot not feel we can do better. We cannot not feel that we can do better. Why do I say that? Justifiably, the expectations of citizens of the new nation were great at the Declaration of Independence. These expectations have preoccupied the agenda of successive post-independence governments. And however the approaches may have differed, I think we can all agree that the ideologies have always been driven by a desire to chart the best path for Jamaicans and to afford each man, woman, boy, and child the opportunity to achieve their full potential and have sustainable livelihoods. This remains the key preoccupation of all of us, not just for Jamaica, but for the entire region. Not just for yesterday, but for tomorrow. And not just for today's youth, and I see quite a few of them around, but for the next generations of our Caribbean's youth. So as we close the curtain on the last 60 years, I think history, once written, will conclude that Jamaica has made notable strides. However, one of my personal guiding principles is to approach every issue from the premise that, as I said, we can do better. Therefore, as the aspirations of 1962 remain relevant today, and the social and economic challenges of nation building have intensified, we ask a couple of questions. Do we have the tools and capacity to forge the promised land envisioned at the raising of the flag? As the winds of change bear down on us, do we have the discipline and fortitude to make the quantum leap that is necessary for the next 60 years to be exponentially better than the first? So what was the mission of independence that I am about to challenge you to want to do exponentially better than at that time? I call to mind the admonition of the Right Excellent Norman Manley, national hero of Jamaica, who said that while his generation were able to achieve political independence, the mission of the next generation is to achieve economic independence. Allow me, therefore, to share a small secret with you. That next generation is us. Next generation is us. And while some help may come from external sources, and I think you'll recognize that phrase, none but ourselves can chart our course for financial freedom. The 60-year milestone provides an ideal opportunity to recommit ourselves to this goal and redouble our efforts to achieve it. However, one thing is sure, we will not meet the needs of today or tomorrow using the approaches of yesterday. The development context of 2022 bears no resemblance to that of 1962. For one thing, we are battling the existential impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, an event that I often compare to as a perfect storm, because it simultaneously extinguished demand and eradicated supply. The impact on the CDB's inherently vulnerable borrowing member countries has been unprecedented, with real economic activity declining by 7.6% in 2020. The effect on service-oriented economies was particularly devastating, with declines as high as 18.8%. Commodity-based economies did not fare much better either, registering contractions of as much as 13.5%. Behind these numbers, though, and these are headline numbers that we all hear all the time, behind these numbers were lives severely disrupted by reduced remittance flows, loss of income or income reduction, socioeconomic obstacles to the delivery of education, and uneven access to health services. And those we never hear about. We only hear the headline growth numbers. Then, just when we began to speak of recovery, right on the heels of the pandemic came the Russia-Ukraine conflict, which, even as we speak, is impacting commodity and financial markets, increasing inflation, disrupting supply chains, and heightening food insecurity. If we can learn anything from recent events, it is that we cannot prevent the shocks. However, we can withstand the impacts if we prepare ourselves by building resilient economies, institutions, and societies. That level of resilience to which I refer, which is the expanding of the resilience ecosystem, will require considerable investment and financing. To give you an idea of the quantum of finance required, the United Nations Global Compact Action Platform on Financial Innovation for the Sustainable Development Goals estimates that US $3 to $5 trillion in investment is required annually for developing countries as a whole to meet the SDG targets. Here in the Caribbean, more than 100 billion is needed to build resilience, implement transformation, and achieve sustainable development in this region. Between 2023 and 2030, the deadline established by the UN for achieving the SDGs, the region will require at least 40 billion for sustainable energy, 22 billion, all of that is US dollars, for water and sanitation, another 11.5 billion for transportation, 13 billion for agriculture and food security, and at least another 12 billion for digital transformation. So while there is commitment to national and regional development targets, our governments are constrained by high debt levels and limited fiscal space. And so where does that leave us? I think we need to start by acknowledging these governments cannot do it on their own, or even in collaboration with the development of financing institutions like the CDB. My friends, this level of financing will only be harnessed through partnerships. And this presents ideal opportunities for business and industry. It is therefore critical for us to reimagine the role of private enterprise in the delivery of sustainable development outcomes. And so that's what I want to speak a little more about this afternoon, the role of the private sector and the issue of finance. So first, my friends from the private sector, and I have quite a few of them in Jamaica, might be thinking, why should we get involved? Development is not my business. So I'm calling on those very friends to re-engineer your mindsets about who is responsible for what. The basis of my appeal is simple. Sustainable development is too important for it to be the exclusive purview of our governments. In fact, the President and Chief Executive Officer of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, Peter Backer, has said that his aim is to position the SDGs at the heart of every business strategy. He argues that business has a critical role to play as a source of investments and as a driver of technological development and innovation, not to mention as an engine for economic growth and employment. Referencing climate change, a focal point of the SDGs and a major global concern, Backer asserts that business is the best implementation partner for governments around the world as they strive to hit the climate targets. The World Business Council for Sustainable Development spearheaded the Low Carbon Technology Partnerships Initiative to bring together businesses and other partners from across the globe to accelerate the development and deployment of low carbon technologies. That wasn't about charity. It was about big business, as at inception, the initiative had the potential to deliver as much as 65% of the necessary emissions reductions, generate between 5 and 10 trillion US dollars in investment, and create 25 to 45 million jobs globally each year. In this backer illustration, the private sector was called on to partner by supporting conservation, pursue nature-based solutions, and prioritizing sustainability in operations and decision-making. Broadening this to include other development challenges beyond climate implies that the notion of sustainable business must become mainstream. Financiers must unlock the capital that will drive sustainable development solutions, and governments and businesses must work together to achieve goals that address development challenges. This makes private enterprise an indispensable factor in the sustainable development equation. The message, therefore, is clear. Development has to be a shared responsibility, one where individual shareholder egos are subordinated through the notion that development of the whole will always imply development for all. Closer to home, most firms have some form of corporate social responsibility as their activities. Corporate Jamaica, as far as I recall, believes in giving back, but now it must evolve from not just giving back as charity, but moving from charity to investment. The question now is how, and when do we embrace the public value proposition of better targeting of expenditure as investment in development? Indeed, we should argue that profitability and development are not incompatible. Furthermore, we could state that private enterprise should apply the ingenuity, innovation, entrepreneurial drive, and goal-oriented approach employed in commercial pursuits to national and regional development. So we need, therefore, to reimagine public-private partnerships. Conventional thinking sees the private sector as an adjunct to the social and economic development process, but with the liberty to opt in or out. But I'm of the view that private sector must have a causal role in development, charting initiatives from inception to implementation, not entering as residual financiers. So why is this important today? Because we need a new type of partnership, a partnership for development between the private and public sectors. The partnership must operate throughout the life cycle, from origination through design to execution to monitoring, evaluation, and adaptation of activities, together with the associated policies and financing that can then overcome the challenges that we face. Consequently, the public-private partnership, or PPP as we know it, will remain constrained in raising its effectiveness. It has reached its upper bound. That was a mechanism for yesterday. We need solutions for tomorrow. So let me invite you to reimagine PPP. What prevents us from reframing PPPs as partnerships for profits and prosperity? When you drill down on the areas of focus and anticipated impacts of sustainable development agenda, they speak to the very heart of business objectives. Programs that enhance education and improve skills development will create a knowledge-oriented workforce with the extensive skill base necessary for industries of the future. That, my friends, is sustainability. When we talk about economic transformation, our goal is to facilitate the growth of business and industry to provide employment and other income earning opportunities to increase disposable income and improve standards of living, which will ultimately result in a sustainable consumer base. That, my friends, is essential for business. When we target health, energy security, water security, and food and nutrition security, it is to improve living conditions and enhance the well-being of our populations, allowing the people of Jamaica and the Caribbean to realize their full potential, which will therefore lead to stable and resilient economies and societies. That will attract investment and foster business growth. Therefore, we are left with no other conclusion than sustainable economies are therefore the sine qua non of sustainable businesses. So it cannot be businesses for development. Development is the basis of sustainable businesses. I put it to you that these are not outcomes that the private sector should leave to chance. Rather, private enterprise must become an active partner in directing and determining implementation of the agenda that will bring about these desired results. Friends, the best way to predict the future is to create it. So where does that leave us? It says at the same time, before we can speak about opportunities for enterprise and investment, we must recognize the need for access to sources of financing. CDB has proposed to establish a multi-sourced, multi-instrument financing ecosystem with a suite of instruments to address various needs, ranging from emergency financing to longer-term fiscal goals. This adroit framework must, of course, be underpinned by appropriate governance and regulatory systems. The instruments would have to include almost everything we know exists now. Bonds designed to propel sustainability and initiatives in the green, blue, and orange economies, and the cultural and creative industries. Private equity to drive new enterprises. Contingent debt instruments to manage uncertainty. Derivative-based instruments to manage risks. And concessional funding to lower the cost of funds. The instruments must be designed, however, to allow use with a purpose and have terms that can be customized to distinguish. I like to think of it as three buckets: financing for rescue, financing for recovery, and financing for repositioning. There are three different aspects of our trajectory, and it cannot be the same finance for all. And when I say the same finance, I'm not talking money, it's the terms. The terms of financing for rescue cannot be the same as the terms of financing for recovery, cannot be the same as terms as financing for repositioning. And so we have to have that nimbleness, that flexibility in terms of how we can create the appropriate terms for the appropriate bucket of the use of financing that we need. As I have repeatedly stated, the level of support needed will not come from traditional sources. So this presents, again, opportunities for innovative instruments, creative partnerships, and novel approaches to marshalling resources for development. So imagine if we could harness the capacity of the pension funds that exist, pool monetary resources across the region, or have the ability to attract institutional investors. What prevents us from devising business and investment initiatives that can propel sustainable development and bring a return on investment that is sufficient to secure funding from global donor organizations and private financiers? What about reimagining the desired reductions in premium, the cost of funds, as the price of implementing activities that build resilience and therefore enhance sustainability? Can we maturate the concept of return on investment and move this from return on investment to return on sustainable development or sustainable investment? We can ask, and it's a question I hear all the time, there's too much risk, not enough return to attract the private sector. Where is our sense of responsibility? And so we can ask the question, is it better to have high nominal returns for a short period of time than to have lower nominal returns over a sustained period of time? Then we start talking sustainability. And should the concept of return not include externalities from achieving sustainability in development? I propose to you that our only limitations lie in a failure to recognize and utilize our limitless creativity and ingenuity. My friends, I hope my words will spark a sense of urgency. Time is against us, and we cannot foresee or predict the next big upheaval. However, we can prepare for it by building resilient businesses, institutions, social systems, and economies. This will only be achieved through, at least in my mind, collaborative endeavors where governments, development finance institutions, and the private sector can engage as development partners, not as residuals, not as one higher, one lower, development partners. To facilitate this, there must be a process triangle. That's my phrase for it. Encompassing viable projects plus adequate and affordable finance and an effective implementation apparatus that is characterized by strong governance and appropriate regulatory frameworks. This combination, the investment activities, the finance, and the implementation apparatus, this combination will engender the confidence that is critical for a development partnership. CDB stands ready to lead or facilitate this collaboration. So as the next 60 years beckon, I will close with the words of one of Jamaica's most beloved sons, and I'm sure you know the Honorable Robert Nesta Marley. So my brethren and my sistren, which way will we choose? We better hurry because we've got no time to lose. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jean, in this 60th year of Jamaica's independence, reminding us that economic independence should also be our aim. And while our vulnerabilities expose us to shocks of all kinds, nothing beats financially investing in and politically committing to building true resilience. Government cannot do this on their own, but through partnerships, particularly with private sector, we can deliver on the goals that we've committed to. We should and must reimagine public-private partnerships because the SDGs truly are everybody's business. And my favorite, to properly predict the future, we must create it. Please give him another round of applause. We'll keep the momentum going for our next panel for this afternoon on financing climate resilience and blue economy. And as I introduce our panelists and moderator, I invite them to come. Very ably, We will hear today from Dr. Stuart Davis, Senior Economist in the UNRCO. Stuart is family, and he comes to us most recently from the Resident Coordinator's Office in Barbados. Make him welcome as he comes. Gerard Alain, Climate Change Senior Specialist within the Inter-American Development Bank. He's based at the bank's headquarters in Washington, D.C., but his decades of experience began right here at the University of the West Indies. Please make him welcome as well. Last but by no means least, Miss Uname Gordon, environment and climate change expert with decades of experience in the field. Uname is a partner and ally, I will say, of the UN system and her work in climate action, and we're happy to have her. Please make her welcome. Our moderator for this session is Senior Economic Advisor Gerard Johnson. Mr. Johnson has extensive experience in economic development in the Latin America and Caribbean region. His clients include large private investors, the European Union, the Inter-America Development Bank, and the Ministry of Finance in Jamaica. Gerard has conceptualized, negotiated, and managed projects and programs to promote financial inclusion throughout the region. Today, we will benefit from his extensive expertise and understanding of the challenges and his ability to generate creative solutions. Please make him welcome. And Gerard, over to you.
Do I go there? Do I stay? You can hear me. Good afternoon, everybody. And I have to say to the president of the CDB, wow, thank you for the, you actually took away everything I was going to say. So that's great.
So we can.
Well, the panelists have been introduced, and I think we've got 40 minutes. So it's now 3 o'clock. So there's not an allowance for Q&A, so I'm going to have to try and, since I'm the only one who can upset them and poke questions at them, I'll have to sort of, or send me a WhatsApp. I'll have to speak for you. Just to underline some of the things that were said that were so important, which I think is worth saying it again so that it gets through. The vulnerability that Jamaica is exposed to from climate change is wrapped up with all the other vulnerabilities to price shocks. You know, we saw what happened with COVID, and there are other shocks that have happened and could happen. The other point that was made is, you know, we can wait in Jamaica for that massive financing gap to be closed by somebody else. Or we could, which I love what the MC picked up on was, or maybe we can create, I love that, Jean, if I can say Jean. You're back at home, so you, we'll use first names, thank you. No, to create that vulnerability while waiting. So, you know, we can wait for grants, we can wait for more concessional finance, we can wait for the big polluters to stop polluting, but we have to stay alive in the meantime. So things that Jamaica has done that are really outstanding to reduce macroeconomic vulnerability. This is when I met the president of the CDB, when he was in the trenches in the dark days when it wasn't, people were not congratulating Jamaica yet. It was still a work in progress. But, you know, incredible initiative by everybody in Jamaica to reduce that vulnerability, create the basis for growth, which to achieve the SDGs, it won't happen without the growth, which, as you heard, has been so anemic for so long. And what's needed is innovation, and hence the panel. There are three things I will stop talking after this. The need to diversify the economy, everybody has agreed. You can't have a two-engine economy when you're small and one engine gets knocked out. The vulnerability of being small is that you rely on one or two sectors, and that's therefore diversification is the path to stability and to achievement of the SDGs. An important thing is the PPPs are so, I've not heard anybody say that, maybe it's been said, but I don't get around as much. But so I heard it from you first. But it's time for chapter 2 of the PPPs. Thank you for saying that. I think that is so important. I've been involved in several PPPs, and how can I say it diplomatically? The distribution of risk between the public and the private partners is skewed in every single case to the private, which a lot of that is because to get them to come, the government absorbs an inordinate amount of the risk. But there's an interesting news story into this new phase of PPPs, which is, there's an example I came across that there's a local NGO that's engaged with a cruise shipping line that has a problem of polluting the very ocean that brings it its livelihood. In other words, the beauty of the Caribbean, but it empties its waste into the sea, and it got caught. So what they've agreed to do is they're working with an NGO to leave the waste with the NGO. The NGO has a way of turning that into fertilizer for farmers who, because of the war, can't afford fertilizer, and therefore they will grow products that the cruise ships, so you talk about, it's a very interesting, and the government, of course, helped to pull it all together. I think that's maybe an example of where we need to go and where the social cost is taken on board by, hopefully the same will happen with mining companies. Anyway, another very important thing that the president said was about this perceived trade-off between commercial return and SDGs or social and environmental consciousness. For some very quick example, the DBJ with $1 million investment has mobilized a $55 million private equity fund, an impact fund. Impact, what does it mean? It means that it's a fund that cares about gender, employment, transparency, environmental protection, labor laws. In other words, it's that consciousness in the private sector that we're looking for. And that's now with $1 million, $55 million fund. Of course, the hard part in raising money was the private money. They were worried about that trade-off. And now there's, for the first time, there's an impact fund in the Caribbean. And I think that's a very good example of what the president was talking about. And the last thing I'll say is climate finance. Jamaica has been a trailblazer. You saw the catastrophe bond that was issued. It's never been done before in this region. And even the premium was paid for by donors. I think that's a nice story. Basically, if you get hit by a hurricane, the people who invested in it get paid. They lose their bond, and that money is used by the government to rebuild. So the premium is pretty high, as you can imagine. The other thing, of course, we know about CRIF, which is, the insurance against catastrophe. And there's a very interesting one that's going on now, and that is because of the terrible disaster in places like Dominica, Abaco, Barbuda, because there's such total devastation as possible, having access to insurance is not, you can't assume it. You now have to fight for it. So now reinsurance costs are trending so high that we may get to the point where many entities, many companies won't be able to afford it. So what's being worked on now is a way of linking insurance premium to specific resilience investments. In other words, if you create a roof on your warehouse that will resist this of Cat 5, your insurance goes down and you can now afford it. So linking insurance premium to investment. So anyway, I wasn't supposed to make a presentation, but I did. So now we'll go to the questions from our panelists. I don't know if everybody saw the questions, but it's basically, this is about climate change and the green economy. Blue economy. The green economy being the climate change included in that, and the blue economy, of course, is we're an island, and the possible economic linkages that the cruise ship one might qualify. So the question to the panelists, we're going to run this as a discussion and not as a monologue. So I'll ask the question. So if I could start with you. You know the questions that you've practiced, I'm sure. And given the importance of the economic transformation of the country, the diversification of the economy, the development of the human capital, you've been hands-on. You deal with the pragmatic realities of it. I won't say. I think they said it in the introduction. You were from the Ministry of Growth and Job Creation. What opportunities do you see in Jamaica for that microcosm, the green and the blue economies, to assist in that transformation?
So thank you. And thank you, Chair, for that really very forthright presentation. I also got some gems from your presentation. I won't go into them, but we talk as we normally do. But I wanted to thank the UN as well and the RCO for the invitation to be here. I am no longer, let me claim a disclaimer, I am no longer at the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation. I am here in my own professional capacity. So last things first. Let me start by looking at probably where the chair left off about the economic transformation that is required. And to probably make the bold statement that there can be really no economic transformation without the economic diversification that is required. I'll start there. And so Jamaica's economy, as we know, the blue, the green, now the orange, and we were talking a little earlier about the silver and the black. But I'll stick within the blue, the green, and the orange, which is the ocean, the land and our forest reserve, and then the orange economy, which is wrapped up in our culture and our music, and you ended with the Bob Marley. That's where we are. And the climate change agenda as well is wrapped up as well in these three economies. We know that the blue economy, we have 65% of our population lives on the coast. And therefore, the blue economy is wrapped up in our marine resources, our infrastructure, and all that is associated, our fisheries, our fisher folks, and the productivity in our fisheries. And if we are to move the bar in terms of economic transformation, then we have to move the bars in those areas. Is it enough? A lot of work has gone on in terms of our marine resources, in terms of our fisheries, but at this point, it is not enough, and you heard it very clear, the numbers, in terms of moving the bar to create transformation. So what else? And I'm really happy you went to the cruise ship, because what else do we need to do to move that bar? The transformation in our transport sector, which is one of the huge ones. The transformation in linking our blue and green economies. So moving probably into offshore wind, which will take both of them together. A lot of work has been done and proven cases have gone on in terms of offshore wind, and therefore linking both blue and green. The aim is really, at the heart of it, is to ensure that we are impacting lives, we are creating jobs, and as they would say, it brings prosperity for all. And we continue to like that word, not for the reasons that many others like it, but because in the rural communities where prosperity is elusive, then this is really where we want. And in the communities on the coast, which uses the marine resources, which use the blue economy, and which use the forest resources, a linking of both is necessary to do that. So if we move forward, then how do we mine the resources from the blue economy, how do we mine the resources from the green economy, and how do we have this interconnectedness between both, so that in the final analysis, we get the diversification that is required, but also that we are impacting the targets that we have set in terms of emission reduction, which is clearly articulated in our nationally determined contributions. And the moral authority to continue to speak about the contribution that we make to this emission reduction globally, while being this small, insignificant emitter of greenhouse gas, but to have this moral authority to continue to speak and to be at the table and to participate in the discourse, I think. And I'll stop there.
Thank you. I love that moral authority. Yes, because you always wonder, it's hard to even measure the emissions that Jamaica puts out compared to the total, but you can very easily measure the negative impact. Gerard, who we were at the IDB at the same time, people always confused. There were two Gerards at the IDB and both from Trinidad. It was a big confusion. Anyway, so it's not confused now. You're all on your own. Gerard, my friend, good to see you again. The comment was made that, concession finance is needed, but there's not enough. I mean, the size of the financing gap is so huge, that it would come from the development banks. That just will never be enough. There are places, there are things like the Green Climate Fund, which I know maybe you can enlighten us, but they're so hard to get at. I mean, it takes so long. What hope is there? I think the comment that was made by the president, if you make little steps, you will always be guaranteed to go very short distances. Mm-hmm. We have to go large distances, and we've run out of time, as he said. You're from the IDB, you know this thing inside out. What can be done to take a big step?
Okay, no, thanks very much, and thanks for the UN for inviting me. Home, it's always interesting when somebody invites you to your own home. I started here, and my credit is that I'm married to a Jamaican, so I have street credit. No, but it's how do we make this transformation? How do we diversify? And I want to steal something from what Jean had said about reimagining PPPs, because I want to say we also have to reimagine the oceans. We're talking about the blue economy. We have to reimagine that vast resource that is out there for small island states, developing states, that we really have not touched on. Case in point, when CDB did a valuation of the blue economy for Jamaica a couple of years ago, and this was because of the lack of information, they just had to deal with fisheries and tourism, and it was estimated to be at least 7% of GDP. This 2017. Approximately about $1 billion US. And that was only from those two components, and even not looking at, they were not even able to go into deep depth of the other aspects of tourism and fisheries. But the blue economy is a vast area. You had mentioned one part in terms of marine renewables. You had mentioned another part about the cruise ship and that aspect of circularity of the circular economy as an integral part of the blue economy. But then there is also, now we're looking at biotech. We're looking at carbon sequestration, how carbon is absorbed, and there's a market being developed, especially in the area of blue carbon. For that transformation that has to take place, or that diversification, it has to there has been a shift in how we think about this resource
that are of the, and it's also related to the orange economy. There's the cultural aspect. These are products. These are things that, dare I say, have a value. And it's being able to manage that value in a sustainable manner. And you had mentioned a couple of things about that. And also, again, drawing from what Gina said, in terms of being inclusive and being equitable, the issue of gender. And those are some of the things that investors, those are things that places like the IDB are putting, and the private sector are looking at. What we are seeing is this, and it's a shift, it's a transformation that, and you spoke about impact investors, social impact investors, you're looking at sustainable impact investors. Those that are looking for projects, programs that go beyond the business as usual. They're looking for, there's a term for blue carbon, high quality. And that high quality relates to whether it's inclusive, whether there's co-management, whether it's transparent, because there is a group of investors, there's a section of the private sector that is looking for that type of investment, because they realize for this to be sustained, for this to continue, for us to create our future, this is really required. You cannot any longer continue along the same path, because it's not sustainable, and we're seeing it. So there is a group that is going along that transformative part, that is looking at a different way of doing business, and is being able to attract that. That means the measures that have been put in place that will provide these high quality type of projects. And we are seeing innovation coming into this. One of the things that you talk about insurance, a couple of years ago, they established an insurance program for coral reefs. And just well, not last year, 2020, there was the first payout in Mexico. They are thinking about that for mangroves. So because it's this issue of how do we maintain these natural assets, especially in terms of our ocean resources. And the other thing is that we don't know a lot about what's out there. And we need to, that's another part of transformation that has to take place. There's a small percentage of what we know about the oceans, very small percentage. And what countries like Jamaica need to do, and others, being able to gather information in a low-cost manner. And there are, again, initiatives that are taking place to fill in those gaps. Because, again, if I'm an investor, if I'm a decision maker, I need that information in order to make the right, sustainable decision. I'll stop there for now.
Okay, before you stop, because
Yeah,
I think you were instrumental in the wind mapping, no?
Yes, back in the day, now you're aging me, thank you very much. We supported some of the programming on the wind farm on Wigton. And this is the type of support in terms of getting that information. Again, if you want to make these investments, that sort of baseline information is required. And then you're talking about a wind map on land. Think about a wind map on the sea. And you will need to do that because it's the building blocks of deciding on a project. What is the expected rate of return? What is the wind resource? And so those are some of the gaps that need to be filled. If you're going to have a solid, sustainable program in terms of transforming the economy. And it's one of the things that within the region, we fall because we have not put enough resources into this area of data because it's not really exciting. You know, data is data, but it's critical. Data that people are looking at is it's becoming the new gold. So we need to be able to put some investment in data gathering, and so that we can link it to these programs. If we want to have a strong program on say, as you indicated, the circular economy or circular measures that took place with the cruise ships, we need to know what type of information, what type of waste is coming, what is how that waste can be utilized as an input into a new process. That requires some basic baseline data, which the NGO had, which I was glad you mentioned, because this is a type of innovation that we will require to move forward, to diversify, to expand and have a broad, inclusive, equitable economic diversification program.
No, data, not sexy, but definitely the story of Wigton's very good, very illustrative story where the data made it possible to make the investment, and then it turned into a very successful PPP. I think it's a good example. But before, I know you dodged the question, so I can't go. You still haven't answered the question about why it takes, is there any way to get at IDB money in less than 2 years? Is there any way?
No, this continues to be not just for the IDB.
In a friendly way.
Yeah, no. It's part of, I think, one of the issues, and May is on my side, so I'm going to throw this on her too. Capacity is an issue, big issue.
Said, as Gerard A said, and I knew both of them quite a long time, and as Gerard A said, it is not just the IDB, it's all the financial mechanisms that exist. I mean, the GCF, which everybody looks to almost as a bank, and yesterday I participated in a very interesting global conference, a green infrastructure conference that was put on by an NGO in Trinidad and Tobago. It was a global conference. It was financed by the National Gas Company of Trinidad and Tobago. It was a climate change conference. So I'll put that there, I am movement. And I made a presentation at that conference yesterday about the financial mechanisms surrounding climate change, which would involve the first generation of climate financing, the second generation of climate financing. And I think one of the barriers to us in the region accessing the financing is a lack of understanding of the financial mechanisms on the one hand. So on the one hand, there is this real lack of understanding of what they are set up to do and how they function. And on the other hand, there's a lack of capacity in country. So it's a two-pronged challenge that we have. People just think that the GCF is a bank. and for that, it makes it very difficult. It also makes it difficult because of this inadequate data. And I'd like to say that data is the oil of climate change. It really is.
It's a renewable energy.
Or the renewable energy of climate change. But without the data to credibly say what it is that we are asking for, we will never be able. We just got a project approved for Barbados, $39.4 million grant funding from the GCF.
Wow.
It took us 3 years. But the first one, and this is the second project for Barbados, the first one took us 5 years. Both of them are water projects. So the data that was collected in the first one informed the second one. I am sure the next one will probably take us 1.5 years. However, you cannot translate what happened in Barbados. So people are saying, well, why don't we just repeat that for Jamaica? It doesn't happen because while we have an homogeneous region, while we have this huge regional pool that we think we are so similar, the impact of climate change on each and every country is sometimes different. A hurricane that comes into St. Lucia, if we remember Thomas, it came into St. Lucia chair as Category 1 storm. When we did the dollar on Thomas, we had to declare the entire island an ecological disaster. It was not even a hurricane. It was a Category 1 storm. And so the impact on the islands are different, and therefore the data, we don't pay enough attention to data collection, but more so data management. Yeah? I'll stop there. This is not what this panel is about. I'm passionate about the data, and therefore we'll go on.
It's justified passion. The Stuart, but you know, I should really call him Dr. Davies, but everybody will get confused and think we're talking about somebody else. Because there's a very famous Dr. Davies. So I won't call you Dr. Davies, I'll call you Stuart, please.
I prefer Stuart. I'm listening to this fascinating conversation and certainly what Gene said in his opening remarks. I think fundamentally, the issue here is about questioning what we understand by value. So over the years, we've become so hung up on GNI per capita as a measure of value that we've forgotten what actually value means. And I say that in the sense that we know that GNI per capita is derived from the flow of value that comes from a very narrow set of assets that a country owns. And I think what we've discussed in this very rich discussion is that that focus is too narrow, and it's too narrow from the perspective of sustainable development. When we think about value, we should be thinking about the value that comes from comprehensive wealth. Now, this is a very sort of, you know, specialized technical term, but essentially, you know, when we think about what we own as ourselves, you know, we're not just focusing on the jobs and the incomes that come from the jobs, but we're thinking about the broader set of assets that we have, you know, our skills, our health, our housing, you know, everything that surrounds that as well. And we should take that to the country level. And when we think about understanding the risks and the value over time of a country, we should be thinking about the changing value of our assets across all of the assets. So our natural assets, our human assets, our productive assets, our foreign assets, our intangible assets, our social assets, all of that together. And when we add that up, you know, you'd be quite surprised at what it amounts to, but also you'd be able to understand a little bit more about the trade-offs that we make and the decisions that we make, particularly on the blue and green economy. So when we think about blue development or green development, we tend to focus on those areas that we most understand or able to monetize or able to understand the risks of. And we've developed a set of instruments around those. And I think what we're slowly beginning to understand is that that in itself isn't sustainable, but it doesn't lead to sustainable development either. Because those trade-offs are very detrimental. You know, you can see that the commercialization can eat into the conservation within our blue assets. And we see those trade-offs happening all of the time, and the erosion, well, we don't understand the erosion that we're doing with many of these decisions, these multi-million, billion-pound commercial decisions that we make. And so therefore we need to move in that direction. We need to move into a direction whereby, you know, when we understand we think of value across all of the assets that a country owns, and we start to incorporate our decision-making, focusing on the trade-offs between progressing productive assets and whether that works in synergy with natural and human assets, or whether it works counter to those. And that's the big threat going forward. And the same is true of risk as well. So when we think of risks and multidimensional risks, those risks can come from the elements that are sourced from wealth, comprehensive wealth. So for instance, you know, if I was to go to a bank and I was to ask for a loan in a bank, the bank manager would look at me and say, well, you know, what are your assets? What's your collateral? What's your income? And how stable is your income? And there's no reason to think that countries can't look through the same lens. And so when we look at risk, multidimensional risk, yes, we can look through the lens of economic, social, and environmental, but also we can look through the lens of what the country has in terms of wealth over time. We can look at what value it's generating from that wealth, and we can look at what the volatility of that wealth is. Now, you may think I've gone off on a bit of a tangent here, but it's very important with regard to economic transformation and climate resilience building in the future. Because unless we devise investments in that way, and Jean, you put this very eloquently in your opening remarks, unless we think about those multidimensional cascading risks and we're able to price those into decisions, then what we think is sustainable development today may not be sustainable development in the future. So what I would do is just leave you on that thought that perhaps really we need to go back to first principles and be thinking about what we understand by value. And if we can solve that, then I think from that we'll be able to improve our decision making, allocate our resources and price those resources in a better fashion, and be able to achieve our sustainable development goals more expeditiously. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. If I could just ask you to go on a little bit. Your experience, you know, was good. You're the senior economist for an institution that understands and cares about the all costs, not just the commercial ones. And you know, as Jean said, there's a massive pool of funds in Jamaica, in the pension funds, in the insurance companies. That's where the savings are, and well, of course, in banks. And to unlock it, there's this perception of risk that if that can be influenced, you know, it's possible to unlock vast amounts of money and energy and direct it, as you were just saying, in ways that are consistent with the SDGs and with climate resilience. I was wondering, the experience that you've had, the other cases you've seen, can you give us, you know, was very eloquent as stories. I mean, I don't know, some examples or something that you've seen somebody figure out somewhere else that could be useful to us.
Sure. I mean, so when we think about sustainable development and investing in sustainable development, it's two sides of the same coin. Okay, so on the one side, you have the project developers that are developing projects in an uncertain world. And on the other side, you have the financiers, and they are financing those projects. And the two depend upon information from each other. So your project developers will develop longer term projects if they believe that there is the financing instruments available to be able to then finance those projects. They're not going to take on a project if they don't believe at the end of the day that a bank will finance them. And similarly, those financial institutions, and this is where tapping into those very large and attractive international funds comes into play, is that they want a pipeline of investable projects, and they want certainty that that pipeline of investable projects will be tailored to those financial instruments. And it's very tricky to match the pipeline with the financing. Often, you know, we have lots of instruments, but we don't have the investable projects, or we have investable projects, but we don't have the tailored financing to be able to achieve that. So I think what I've learned, certainly from working both inside and outside of the UN on development capital projects, is firstly that balance needs to be struck. The second, the second area is very much around being able to price risk as well, and being able to, I mean, we're in a world now where we can't really just consider climate risks alone. We have to think about multidimensional cascading risks. And there needs to be development, both in terms of our own skills of being able to apply these new methodologies, but also the technology available to be able to then put those into pricing models and be able to price, as you say, perhaps not necessarily short-term high returns, but more balanced, longer-term, perhaps lower returns within the financial architecture. So there's two thoughts, if I can leave you with those.
Thank you very much. Well, we are almost out of time, so I'll have to skip to the last question, which is somewhat self-serving by the organizers, which is what? No, I'm joking, but it's a valid question. The UN has so much intellectual and reputational resources that it could bring to bear. What, from your point of view, could the UN do to help advance this agenda?
If I may start.
Besides this event, for example.
Beside this event that they invite me as a friend here, I think, to be quite frank with you, I think the UN and the UN system as a whole, which is this global organization, has this global reach, but at the same time, with their national presence, the understanding of the national sensitivities, which they can use to bridge these gaps. I think you have, as part of that, and I like to talk about moral authority, and I'm no paragon of morality, but I think the UN has this moral authority to speak on issues at this global level, but at the same time, this unique opportunity to translate and have boots on the ground. And I think that's one of the things that if you can perfect that and be able to do that. When we talk about financing, then you also have this global reach. You can transfer a best practice from the smallest town in Africa to the smallest community in Jamaica with a phone call or a paper or something. And I think in this era of climate change, where we don't have time, where the issue of the transition is taking place so fast, I think that's a comparative advantage that the UN has, which you don't use very well. And if I will say so, and then it's my friend, I say this all the time, you can do this without compromising any of the principles of the UN, and we know what those are. But that translation of, and then you have this huge data pool and resource pool, which you can at the snap of a finger, you can disperse across the world. And so if you can put all of that together in this time and in this period, then I think we could have a system that would better serve the people. And it is always at the forefront of our minds. People like us who are in the trenches in climate change, we are serving the people. So it has to land, because sometimes some of the issues really don't land. But you have an opportunity with presence on the ground to assist with landings.
We can leave now. No, I hope that was recorded. Thank you so much. Very, very good. Gerard, I pour you, sorry. Hard to follow that.
Simple in terms of my point here is that there's a lot of targets that are out there. You have the SDGs, you have the climate targets, you have ACHI. And I think one of the things that the UN may need to do, or maybe need to do a little better, is show the interconnection between all of these. Because what we tend to see is that there's one group on, okay, I'm following the SDGs. But we know the SDGs or some of the targets are connected to the ACHI targets or to the climate targets or to the other multitude of targets.
Yeah.
And if this issue of development is being considered as a multidimensional issue, we need to break apart these silos, and it's maybe just about messaging.
Excellent. Yeah.
It may just be a messaging so that the stakeholders, us, when we are talking about the SDGs, we also thinking about, okay, how is this connected to my the implications on ACHI or on biodiversity, on climate. So it's not, we're not overwhelmed by the acronyms, by the way, but we see that this is all connected. And because again, it's a matter of efficiency. Jerry, look, yes.
No,
it's a matter of efficiency so that we are not into this, well, I jump from here on climate, I jump from here on SDGs, but I'm following all of that because we don't have time to be able to juggle all of this. Let me be able to juggle one on development, and as I said, it may be a matter of messaging, because that once you get the messaging right, and it gives that perception, this is all connected. That we are not approaching this in a silo approach. We are approaching it from a holistic, integrated approach.
You actually pulled it off. Oh. I didn't know how you were going to do it. But you did. Stuart, I don't know if it's given who pays your paycheck. I don't know if you want to answer that question, but I will, you don't have to.
So I'll be objective.
Very good.
No, I think you make an excellent point, and I think it's no coincidence why we titled today's event "Sprint for the Goals." We have 8 years to go, and we really do need to start building momentum. And as you mentioned, the old ways are no longer fit for purpose, so we need to think of new ways of achieving these goals. And what I would say is we are thinking, we've been thinking for some time about this, about how we don't just focus on one goal, but we look at interventions that cut across goals, okay? And we look for accelerators, and we try to choose our interventions or devise our development capital platforms in such a way that we're able to touch lots of pinch points across the SDGs so that we can accelerate those going forward. One such example is a development capital platform that is being developed across Barbados and the Eastern Caribbean called Blue Invest. Now, this came out of a new fund called the Joint SDG Fund, where we encouraged, the UN family is encouraged to come together to look at the comparative advantage across agencies, funds and programs, and to develop programs that cross-cut the SDGs so that we can have maximum impact. And one such program is called Blue Invest. And this program, it's called Blue Invest.
Blue Invest, yeah.
It's catalytic capital combined with technical assistance. So you know, we've learned from the lessons of capital programs that are accessible, but the transaction costs of accessing those programs can be quite high, and especially for small island developing states that have limited capacities. So we've developed a model whereby there's technical assistance to be able to take last mile investment proposals through to investment and then invest in them, with hopefully quite strong multipliers as a result of that. So we are looking forward. It's still 3 years into the reform progress, so there's still some time to go. But there are really strong, encouraging signs that going forward, the synergies that we can reap across the UN family, exploiting the comparative advantage, reducing duplication and waste ultimately means that we can have real impact, stronger impact going forward. And that is at the heart of what the UN mission is about here.
Excellent. You'll keep your job, I think. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for your patience. Dr. Keneal, or dare I say Gary, thank you for the opportunity. And to the panelists, great job. Thank you. Okay.
A lot of nuggets earlier. Thank you very much, colleagues. One of my favorites data is the oil or the gas of climate change. Renewable. Say it again. Say it again. Renewable energy, not bad gas, renewable energy. So we need to ensure that we have access to good quality, reliable data and data management. I know my data officer was enjoying that, Dr. Shelley Trim, she was having a field day. And we're having this conversation today because we realize the need to take care of our climate, but we also realize the need to diversify our economies to reduce dependency on any one area, right? So we were encouraged to more largely entertain the opportunities, not just on the blue economy, but green economy. I heard silver economy, orange economy, black economy for sustainable development. So I learned a lot. Dr. Keneal, you got your comms officer to sit in on an economic discussion. So it was absolutely wonderful. Friends, all day we've been hearing from some of the brightest minds in their field, and we will continue in that vein. Right now, we will hear special remarks from UN Assistant Secretary General Elliott Harris. Secretary General Antonio Guterres appointed Mr. Elliott Harris of Trinidad and Tobago as Assistant Secretary General for Economic Development and Chief Economist in April 2018. Mr. Harris brings 25 years of international experience in the fields of international economics and development policy analysis, coupled with knowledge of the UN system, multilateral, as well as interagency coordination processes. Prior to his appointment, Mr. Harris served as ASG and head of the New York office of UNEP. He began his career in the International Monetary Fund in 1988. Right now, we'll hear from none other than Mr. Elliott Harris, ASG. Please make him welcome.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to all of you in Jamaica. It's a real shame that I can't join you there. I'm very happy to have the occasion to join you at least vertically and to share some thoughts on a really interesting topic, the creative economy, what we're calling the orange economy, that you discussed in the previous session. The Sustainable Development Agenda that we're all fascinated by, it aims, among other things, at creating a sustainable economy that will be structured and organized very differently than what we have now. This transition towards sustainability will be full of innovation and change, of course. And a good amount of creativity will be needed to design and steer these aspects of the transition. So this is a very opportune time to reflect on the creative economy itself, both in its role as in reimagining the productive and value-adding structure of the overall economy, and on its importance to our societies. There's been growing attention paid to the creative economy in recent years as its economic importance becomes more and more apparent. Cultural and creative activities absorb an estimated 1% of the global labor population, not labor force, population, and they produce well over $2 trillion annually in revenues. In many economies, the creative sector has actually been growing much more rapidly than traditional productive sectors. UNESCO has estimated that Jamaica's cultural and creative industries contribute over 5% of the country's GDP. They generate revenues in excess of $2 billion Jamaican dollars a year, and they account for over 3% of total employment. According to a recent survey, over 60% of these jobs are held by women, and well over a third of them by young people under the age of 35. Broadly defined, creative industries refer to the goods and services that are produced and distributed using creativity and intellectual capital as primary inputs. It's a very broad definition, but it covers a wide range of activities, things like advertising and architecture, arts and crafts, design and fashion, film, video, photography, music and performing arts, publishing and electronic publishing, research and development, software, computer games, TV and radio. The nature of the creative industry sector has also been evolving, and the industries themselves are changing at different speeds and in different directions depending on the type of activity. Some of them, like traditional crafts or books and visual and performing arts, are produced in roughly the same way as they were in the past, but others have become far more technology intensive and service oriented, such as the music and film industries or television and radio broadcasting, the new media and design. Because of these changes, the cost structures have become more fluid, and now they often present less of a barrier to entry than in the recent past. Creative activities are also linked in with the traditional sectors of the economy. One good and very relevant to Jamaica example is the tourist industry. Handicrafts, gastronomy, various forms of cultural services, and live entertainment have always been the underpinnings of the tourism sector. But more recently, the spread of digital information technologies and the platform economy gives to the tourism sector access to a much wider range of potential clients, nationally and internationally. It provides for more creative and compelling digital marketing and publicity, and it gives new earnings opportunities through home and boutique accommodations alongside traditional hotel accommodations. But by its very nature, creativity cannot be predicted, although it can be anticipated. Allow me to give a couple of examples just to illustrate this point. Who would ever have expected that little St. Lucia and little Trinidad and Tobago, with a combined population equivalent to 0.02% of the global population, could produce 3 Nobel Prize winners, 3. 2 of them in literature within 1 decade. The third one was in economics, but we economists are rather creative individuals, and so I'll say that that counts when we're talking about creativity. How does a carnival mass band leader from Trinidad come to design the pageantry for the opening ceremonies of 3 different Olympic Games and a football World Cup? Why was little Jamaica able to create an entirely new genre of music that is listened to all over the world? I've heard reggae in China. Now, on the surface of things, there's little about the Caribbean that would have predicted these accomplishments on the global stage, and yet they happened. And of course, many different types of creative outpourings happen constantly within the region. No one can ever tell exactly when or where such outpourings will take place, and that makes planning for them a very uncertain undertaking. But it is clear creative expression is more likely to flourish in a conducive environment. Preparing for an active creative economy can be done, and done well. And to my mind, in order for creative expression to grow into a creative industry, for creative industries to establish themselves in a creative economy, at least 3 elements of preparation and enabling should be present. First, support for entrepreneurship through institutions and infrastructure that could encourage innovation and promote marketable creative undertakings. Second, a regulatory and legal framework that facilitates intellectual collaboration and the exchange of ideas and skills, and also promotes and protects intellectual property rights. Third, access to sufficient and appropriate financing to enable a scaling up of the creative undertaking to the point where it can actually provide a livelihood. Deficiencies in any one or all of these areas are often enough to prevent a creative idea or activity from evolving into reliable value creation and jobs and income. All of these areas are where the public sector can help. The support for entrepreneurship, for example, it can take the form of providing the physical infrastructure for creative activities at an affordable cost. For example, broadband internet access or performance spaces or commercial premises. It can also take the form of providing training in the technical and vocational and business skills that are needed to translate creative ideas into marketable activities. A supportive legal and regulatory framework would facilitate a proper understanding of intellectual property rights and protect them effectively. It could also provide guidance for setting up effective and manageable contracts between collaborating partners. But it is in finance that the most support is needed. There is definitely a funding gap for creative industries, especially startups, although its size is hard to assess. What is more important, however, is to understand the reasons why creative undertakings find it so difficult to mobilize adequate finance, as this might indicate where professional solutions could be sought. First, establishing the value of an innovative or creative idea before it has become marketable is intrinsically difficult. Without an identified demand and clear pricing structure, it's challenging to estimate a possible revenue stream or to calculate the return on the creative investment. Creative endeavors often seem more risky than others. Everything depends on the creative innovator, him or herself, not only whether their ideas are marketable, but also whether they have the skills to succeed in the marketplace. Moreover, the creative impulse that's behind creative endeavors, it's intangible and may not be backed up by physical assets that could serve as collateral for credit. The problem is frequently compounded by a lack of financial skills of the creative entrepreneurs, making it difficult for them to present a compelling case to potential funders or investors. And all of these factors combine to make it quite difficult to secure finance. On the other side of the coin, the mainstream traditional financial institutions often lack the experience to deal with these kinds of uncertainties and the perceived risk of creative enterprise. Typical business loans may not be suited to this kind of activity, but the institutions often lack the flexibility to design more appropriate financial instruments. And since most, if not all, developing countries suffer from a relative or absolute lack of venture capital to fund innovative activities in general, adequate financing for creative industry is very difficult to mobilize without more flexible financial instruments and active risk mitigation mechanisms. And this reflection highlights the possible contributions by the public sector to closing the funding gap. Public sector could provide funding either through public-private partnerships or directly through transfers or indirectly through subsidies or preferential tax treatments. It can encourage the development of these effective risk mitigation mechanisms and suitably flexible innovative financing instruments to facilitate the provision of private capital. I'll come back to this issue a little bit later. The creative economy in the last couple of decades has been deeply affected by the emerging digital technologies. First, digital information technologies have greatly expanded the possibilities for intellectual and creative collaboration across both time and space. Digital platforms have transformed the way people can create and consume cultural and creative products. The COVID-19 lockdowns accelerated and expanded this transition as consumers were forced online and suppliers of cultural and creative content adapted their offerings to these new platforms. But the potential for further transformation and expansion is immense. Digitalization can help to overcome the constraints of size and location and can allow for sustainable and inclusive economic development even in remote areas. E-commerce creates closer links between local producers and larger national markets, as well as links to regional and global markets, and they can thus enhance potential export earnings. New technologies, particularly digital ones, create significant gains in productivity. They reduce production costs, they increase exposure, they lower the traditional barriers to entry for a range of products and services, including in the creative domains. It means that they can unleash previously untapped potential for adding value and for generating employment and income. But digitalization also opens the doors to abuses that are far more difficult to combat. As an example, UNESCO estimates that as of 2018, digital revenues made up at least half of the turnover of the global music industry. And 59% of those digital revenues came from streaming. And yet the revenues returned to the creators of online content represented only just over 7% of global royalties. And of course, the outright piracy of intellectual property is now much easier than ever before and much larger than ever before. The potential of digitalization can only be realized by those on the right side of the digital divide, with broadband access and the necessary devices, who've made themselves and their offerings easily discoverable on the internet and who can effectively advertise, market, and distribute their offerings digitally. All of this requires a particular set of skills and access to the necessary digital infrastructure. All of this is a particular challenge for the average creative enterprise. Because for all of its potential, the creative economy is still plagued by fundamental problems that hamper its growth and value creation, particularly in developing countries. The first of these is valuation. Existing economic measurement systems are designed to capture the direct and visible returns to an economic activity or investment, and they depend on market prices. For the most part, however, the contribution of creative industries to GDP, employment generation, income generation, and to domestic tax revenues or export earnings is just not fully captured. The economic significance of this sector is chronically underestimated. More fundamentally, data on the activities of the creative and cultural sectors and the measurement of the value produced are woefully inadequate. Now, this lack of data limits the understanding of the creative economy, how it functions, and it hinders access to finance. It prevents evidence-based policymaking and the formulation of effective public sector support. Because of their small size, many creative enterprises may lack the technical, business, and financial skills that they need to assert themselves in a competitive marketplace. And even where skills training is available, it may not be tailored to the specific requirements of the individual enterprise and may not be easily accessed, and they may be unaffordable. Cultural and creative externalities can be important determinants of success for creative enterprises. Exposure to culture, the proximity to different types of creative expression that build on and feed off each other, that can create and enable creative collaboration, encourage a wider range of innovative activities. And here again, small size and the fragmentation of the industry makes it much more difficult to generate these externalities and benefit from their effects. So what could be done? Well, I think first and foremost, as a foundation for more specific interventions to address some of these weaknesses, it's necessary, first and foremost, to recognize explicitly that cultural and creative activities and industries have more than a cultural or social impact. They can be a critical part of the economy, an important source of employment, income, and value creation. And so governments, academia, private sector, partnerships can be formed to research and deepen the understanding of the economic and social potential of the creative sector and how it is being affected by technological advances and digitalization. This recognition will motivate the various support measures and interventions that need to be put in place, but they will need a solid evidence base. It should be a priority, therefore, to improve the information on the creative sector by generating comprehensive data, both as the evidence base for designing effective policy interventions and to facilitate eventual access to finance. Data platforms and tools to collect and analyze the necessary data could be built through a collaborative effort between the government and industry associations, and support should be provided to individual entities in the sector to help them report the required information. Governments should seek, at all levels, governments should seek to narrow some of the infrastructure gaps. Visual and performing arts, for example, they need suitable performance spaces. Nascent enterprises need adequate commercial premises, affordable access to utilities and transportation. The government, again, can collaborate with the associations and representatives of the creative industries to ensure that the right kind of infrastructure is made available at an affordable cost. Broadband access is essential for any modern business. It's particularly critical for the creative industries, given the growing importance of digital technologies in that sector. Creative enterprises would benefit from public support programs that help them to procure the computers and other devices necessary to take advantage of these technologies. The government, industry groups and associations, leading creative enterprises themselves, they should all collaborate in developing digital platforms that would be made available to all creative entities at an affordable cost. These platforms would be of particular help to the small creative enterprises in market development, effective advertising, improving their discoverability through links on search engines to their offerings, for export promotion, for digital marketing and distributions. As mentioned earlier, creative entrepreneurs need access to affordable public technical and vocational training in teachable creative skills like pottery, glazing, or sound engineering and digital photography, but also in the necessary enterprise skills, business, marketing and distribution, financial and digital skills. And the skills training must be tailored to the specific needs. The tailoring could be accomplished again through partnerships with the groupings and associations and leading businesses of the sectors, of the various subsectors of the creative economy. And this could enable a much more effective scaling up of this particular form of support. These types of collaboration between the public sector and industry associations and groups and leading creative enterprises can help to overcome some of the disadvantages of small size of the average creative entity and the fragmentation of the sector. Improved collaboration and communication between the government and the creative industry actors and among and between the creative entrepreneurs themselves, well, that will strengthen their ability to articulate and advocate for the help and the changes that they need. And it'll help to generate those creative externalities that are so beneficial. Making sure that that full range of support interventions and mechanisms are in place can generate externalities of support, if you will, complement those creative externalities. But this kind of coordinated, holistic approach to support is most likely to come about if an overall evidence-based strategy of support for this sector is in place. Equally important, because the creative industries are based on creative impulse and intellectual capital, they're particularly dependent on a full understanding and effective protection of intellectual property rights. The government, again, in collaboration with the industry and with other relevant actors, should support and guide creative industries in deepening their understanding of how the intellectual property rights regime functions. And they should strengthen the protection that's afforded to individual creative entrepreneurs. And finally, the government can and must play an important role in improving the prospects for adequate financing for the creative industries. Various forms of direct and indirect funding are possible, as mentioned earlier. Where appropriate partnerships exist, some of this direct funding could be provided through the umbrella organizations or associations of the creative sector, reducing the administrative burden on the government, improving targeting. Different forms of finance may be needed for funding the productive activities of the creative enterprises than for funding the commercialization of their eventual output. The government can also assist in arranging or directly funding risk mitigation mechanisms, for example, first loss guarantees. The amount of funding required for this might be actually quite manageable, given the relatively small size of the investments in question. Financial regulators could work with the financial industry to explore options for new financial instruments that are better tailored to the specific requirements of the sector and consider how these should be treated from a prudential and regulatory perspective. And finally, the improvements in the data on the sector and the definition of its economic contribution, well, they should both improve the financial sector's understanding of the value-creating potential of the creative industries and help to overcome their reluctance to provide adequate funding on appropriate terms to support the creative sector's activity and future growth. This is indeed a broad agenda, but it is justified by the still unrealized potential of the creative economy. I can only hope that my remarks have helped to underscore how big the return on this investment will be. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ASG, for reminding us of the power, the value, the influence of the orange economy and creative industries, viable spaces for investment as we encourage economic diversification in small island developing states like Jamaica. He can still hear us, so please give him another round of applause. Thank you, ASG. And a perfect segue to the next panel, innovative financing to promote circular and creative economy. Who will we be hearing from now? First, Mr. Wayne Beecher, founder and CEO of Alt Catalyst, an impact entrepreneurship whose mission is to identify, inspire, and catalyze the next generation of human-centered innovators. Mr. Beecher brings to the table decades of entrepreneurial and senior management experience, which spans the public and private sector, and dare I say, an expertise which is often called upon by the UN Development System. Mr. David Brown, Director of Policy and Research at Jamaica Creative, is an historian and cultural researcher. He also works in the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment, and Sport. His fieldwork supported a submission to UNESCO, which facilitated the inscription of the Maroon heritage of Moortown to the representative list in 2008. Joining us also is Mr. Damian Campbell, Program Manager for Social Enterprise and Youth Engagement at the British Council. Over a decade of experience here in providing high-quality support to people who are socially excluded or who are experiencing problems through the implementation of various social development programs. Last but by no means least, Ms. Diane Edwards, President of JAMPRO, the National Investment and Export Promotion Agency. Under her leadership, JAMPRO has facilitated approximately US 1.75 billion in investments, US 1.29 billion in export sales, and created over 51,000 jobs. She has led JAMPRO's transformational development to serve as a catalyst for wealth creation. And with her continued guidance, JAMPRO has won a number of international awards. She herself has also been internationally recognized as a Business Development Executive of the Year and Woman of the Year in Sales for 2021. And this panel will be ably led and moderated by Dr. Peter John Gordon of the University of the West Indies, Graduate Director, Economics Department. Ladies and gentlemen, please make them welcome.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I want to pick up on a few things that were said in the earlier sessions, starting with Jean and culminating in the presentation that was just concluded. Some very interesting topics were broached. The issue of value and monetization. We've always valued West Indies cricket. Hopefully we still do. But there was a time when the players worked for companies and they were given time off to tour. So it wasn't an economic activity. So is it just enough that we value something, or must we be able to make a living from it? In Jean's presentation, he talked about a public-private partnership and rethinking the way things are done. It almost sounded to me as if we are touching on the role of a social planner versus the role of a private business. And the objectives are very different. And so should we be crafting incentive compatibility constraints which get businesses to behave as a social planner would? Because it's not going to happen because they had an hallelujah moment and there's a new realization that, we should do these things. And they'll tell you that they're responsible to their shareholders and they have to turn some kind of a return to them. And even if we could decide on what value is and we could measure it and in the creative industry, and I should first of all point out that the poster for this session really said innovative financing to promote circular and creative economy, but we are talking really just about the creative economy in this panel. So even if we could identify all the desirable areas that deserve financing, the question is how to operationalize it. Many financial institutions would much rather lend to buy a car
than a student loan. Because if you renege on the car loan, they seize the car. But slavery has been abolished for a while, so student refuses to pay. It's a little bit more challenging. And no doubt the same kinds of issues arise when it comes to intangibles. What is it that you will be seizing? And so there is need for some kind of a innovation, some new way of looking at the problem. But recently, going back to West Indies cricket, in a not too distant past, I think the West Indies Cricket Board had come up with some idea that senior players should be paid less so that upcoming players could be paid something. And there was rebellion of the senior players. Is it selfishness, or is it a failure to recognize that they are where they are because an investment was made in them, in providing world-class venues on which they can hone their skills? So what kind of financing can we give to the creative sector so that when people, as the vernacular say, boss, they would be willing to provide some resources for others to come? Or is it that they are expecting that because they bring glory to the country, that they are owed, that is their way of the country paying them, and each generation there has to be a new pot of resources to sustain them? Well, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to ask each panelist, starting with Mr. Campbell on my far left. I don't know if that's politically, but on my left, to make a few opening remarks about how do you see the challenge that we face, what are the issues as you see them, before we get into a kind of question and answer session. Mr. Campbell.
Sure, thank you so much. I'll just start by sharing an experience I had last week. I had the privilege of working with some of my colleagues from across the countries in the Americas. We're in Mexico. We had a social event, and that afforded the group drinks. And my colleagues decided to taste the various products that were displayed at the bar. I was looking around and I saw a pitcher, an ice pitcher, with the brand Appleton on it. That sparked my interest to ask the bartender, even though I don't drink, do you have this brand liquor? He searched around and he found one bottle of Appleton Special. I told my colleagues that this is from Jamaica. This is a prime product that we boast about. And throughout that process, they took a shot, a taste of the liquor. And interestingly, that was the high point of their evening, not how it changed their thought process in any way, but just the fact of the taste, how unique it was. And what came across to me is how can we, as a Jamaica, across the cultural and creative industries, package whatever product or service we have so that people around the world can really taste the brand Jamaica. And from there, I started to think more about this event. And for me, I started to look at how do we grow this sector? And from my point of view, I've seen where it is not foreign for Jamaica to grow sectors that are poised for growth. So it must be that we look at what we've done well in the past what are some of the good principles that we would have taken on in other sectors? How can we apply it to this current sector? If we look at the growth of and support for the agriculture sector in Jamaica in the past 5 to 10 years in terms of the investments and the accessibility to the sector. If we look at more recent times, the work that has been done to grow social enterprises, we have a model that we can really utilize to grow even more the cultural and creative industries. So the challenges are not different. We're seeing issues around how this sector might be disaggregated or subsectors working by themselves. But it must be that we, assess the value that we have, create that greater awareness at all levels. Because I've seen from experience that there's sometimes a lack of understanding at the critical places. Say, for instance, the point you made around the financial sector supporting the growth of the economies. They need to understand and value more, even as policymakers. What does this sector bring to the growth of Jamaica? What does it do for the general populace? And from there, we start to create the change. We start to implement the necessary policies that can grow any particular sector. So I think it requires more focus and direct intervention into growing the sector.
Mr. Brown?
Thanks for the opportunity. I recently, last week or the week before, the ministry was invited by UNESCO to send a group of artists to World Music Expo in Portugal. The ministry selected some young female musicians that specifically wanted females, but also because of gender balance, we sent Abija, one of the performing artists. What became very clear in that whole experience, which allowed them to network with musicians worldwide, producers, promoters, you name it, and record labels, was that it was because the specific space was created through UNESCO and through WOMEX that allowed those artists that opportunity. By and large, the Jamaican entertainment sector, as a subset of the creative sector, the members of that sector aren't allowed these kind of opportunities readily. When we observed some of the challenges that they had, even through a sponsored thing, such as acquiring things like visas, the expense and the process to access visas to foreign markets, particularly in Europe, when we looked at what it would cost them on their own to actually engage in a process like this and the logistics associated with it, if they hadn't had the support of a multinational, say UNESCO, and the state through the Ministry of Culture, it wouldn't have been possible for them. So what was the lesson from that experience? The lesson from that experience is that our creatives do need a fair amount of assistance, and only when they get that kind of support can they thrive and develop and own their craft. If you think about what we call the small or the upcoming musicians, not comparable to like the Shaggies or the Shensi and or Warsaw, what is it that causes them to really thrive? They have done so purely because of their creative genius. If you think about it, the majority of Jamaican artists, musicians I'm talking about, Bob Marley or so, have thrived in spite of a government structure, outside of a formal structure. Suppose we were to provide that structure for them to become more engaged in, how much more exponentially would they develop? And for us, certainly from the Ministry of Culture, that is one of our biggest observations, that we need to provide this enabling environment within which they can thrive. And later on, we can get some more specifics about what the ministry is doing.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Edwards?
Thank you, and thanks a lot to UN Jamaica for giving us this opportunity. I think this is a fascinating topic. For my sins, I used to work for Appleton, and I did brand building for Appleton for 10 years in London. So I know exactly what you're talking about. And Mexico used to be our #1 market. So it's interesting story. But I think I would like to take this topic from another point of view. I think in Jamaica, we've constantly spoken about talent and not about business. We've spoken about talent in sport, we've spoken about talent in athletics, but talent is only the raw material to create a business. And what we've not done is create that enabling environment that David was talking about, and to look at the creative industries as a business. A business, with like any other business, needs revenue streams. It needs an underpinning of the raw material, yes, but how do you transform that raw material into a revenue generating business? And this is the side of it, the unsexy side of the creative industries that we've never taken seriously, and I think is a fundamental missing element. So if you look at across the region, there's immense talent, but that talent goes its own way. It's individualistic, it's not organized into a business. What I think we need to do is look at business models that are viable, because when we see a company like the Lab listing on the Jamaica Stock Exchange, that's the direction that we need to go. So how do you help creatives who quite often are right brain thinkers and don't even want to deal with their left brain? How do you help them to partner with people who can help them create the structures that then become a business? So how do we get people to look at artist management, publishing, IP, different areas of the creative industries that right now we don't take seriously? How do we de-risk the industry so that financiers start to understand that there is a huge business in creative industries? How do we create a Pixar in Jamaica that does animation for blockbusters? How do we create, through digitization, new business models that will help our creatives to thrive? And that's really what we're about at JAMPRO. How do we create the tax incentives and the support programs? So we've been talking to government a lot about how do we create those business structures, because that's the missing. We have no film fund, for instance. We can't support young directors, screenwriters, etc., in taking their product to market. So we created a Propeller program, that's the name of it, Propeller, with the Jamaica Film and Television Association to finance short films. And we've taken short films to market because our focus is export, because you're not going to grow and you're not going to thrive through selling to 3 million people. So you really have to take creative product to the international market. And so we've taken Propeller films across the world to Cannes and various places like that with quite good success. We have one film called Flight, which won a series of awards through Cannes, in Atlanta, in Guadeloupe. So we have the product, but how do we sell that product? How do we market it? And how do we create the funds and that will underpin the development of this creative industry? If people thrive in Silicon Valley, it's because of venture capital, angel investing, and funding. And if you can't marry the funding with the creatives, if you can't get them to speak the same language and really develop the vehicles and the enterprises that will move them along, then I don't think we will ever realize the potential of creative industries. I'll stop there for a bit.
Thank you very much. Mr. Beecher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the delegates from the UN who invited me to be here. I realize I'm the only non-institutional representative here. But I used to be institutional, so as an ecosystem player and as a operator now in this space, I'm at the point where I'm getting a bit impatient to see something happen. I feel as if we're approaching the edge, the verge of something that could become exponential. But for some reason, there's a catalyst that's required that's not yet in place to actually take us to the next level. As a financier, we like to look at the numbers. I don't know if Dan have the numbers for Jamaica, but at a global level, the cultural and creative industry is valued at some $2.5 trillion. And regionally in Latin America and the Caribbean, That's $124 billion. And in terms of cultural heritage, we could say Jamaica is most endowed, from sports to music and so on. So what has prevented us from actually taking a step towards carving out a greater piece of that pie that could, if once, as you say, unleashed, could have catalytic effect on an exponential growth potential, not just for the industry, but for the entire economy. And if you look from an economic perspective, if you look at overall macroeconomics, I think in terms of a competitive advantage or comparative advantage, our cultural and creative industry has the greatest potential to really take us further along the path of growth. And I think we're going to explore some of the challenges and opportunities there. But certainly what is required, and this is my central theme, is that there's a catalyst required to actually move the ecosystem to a state where it can experience rapid growth. And a couple of years ago, thanks to Denise, we did some work with the UNDP to explore some of the mechanisms that can unleash this kind of rapid growth at an ecosystem level. And we had defined a microcosm of an ecosystem that could be orchestrated to bring finance, entrepreneurship, and regulatory support to catalyze some of these growths. So I'd love to explore that in this conversation.
If we look at our elite athletes, is there a story somewhere in there? What was the model? I mean, we've traditionally done well at athletics, but something happened in Jamaica. The model used to be, you go to high school, you run at champs, the scouts from US schools come down, they pick you up and they take you to a US school, and you basically put on a Jamaican jersey when it's time for an international event. And that was your connection. Today, the majority of our elite athletes live and train in Jamaica. So it's not just the talent. There is an ecosystem that supports that talent. It's not just an actor acting in film. There are people behind the cameras. There are skills there. In music, it's not just the artistry of the singer and the band. There is a whole industry employing a whole lot of people. But let me go back to our elite athletes. And it's easy to measure when we're talking about them. What is easy to measure? That they are world class. They are world class. They're running 100 meters like anybody else. And the question is, who gets to the tape first? So there's no accommodation for small developing whatever. Now, on other cultural fronts, it might be a little different, but again, reggae music has conquered the world. So again, it has shown itself to be world class. So in developing this industry, I think what the elite athletes have shown us is that standards are important, world standards are important, and they are all oriented to the export market. They were never ever going to make a decent living just running at local track meets. I mean, they run at local track meets every so often, but their bread and butter really is on the international scene. Yeah.
Building on Diane's contribution earlier, I was fortunate enough to actually do a study on our sports industry when I was at the IDB. And I must say the catalyst for it was around University of Technology and MVP that actually sat down and crafted a business model. We're always fast, but they crafted a business model that brought in expertise and brought in the coaches and brought in the agents and the managers. And, very humble beginning, but 3 years from the start of the business model, we had breakthroughs at the Beijing Games and so on and so forth. So, I mean, the catalyst is easy. to identify that once you start to orchestrate an entire microcosm of an ecosystem in a business model, you can see results, because talent alone is just not enough.
No, it's just, and I can pick up on that, because if you look at the hip hop moguls of this world, how have they created super wealth? They've created a brand through singing. Okay, Rihanna was originally a singer, but Jay-Z took her, molded her, made her into a brand, because brands are what really generate wealth. And once she had that brand, then she created Fenty Cosmetics, and she's a billionaire. And that's really where we have to go. So the trick we're missing with our athletes is we're not really extending the brand into merchandising, into different types of revenue generation. And that's where I think we need to go with our creative products as well. You know, where is the video game of Usain Bolt and Shelly Ann? Where is the metaverse location with, you know, Sharika Jackson or whoever? I mean, I'm just throwing names out.
Yeah.
But the point is there. We need to be creating the products that the world actually wants.
Absolutely.
The question was raised earlier, or a statement around the role of the government. But I think we probably are jumping a little bit ahead of ourselves. First thing we have to do is identify what is needed, and then ask who is best positioned to give that support. In some instances, it may be the government, but in other instances, can we plug what is going on in the creative industry into the rest of the economy? So the financial services, so that when you know, the creative industries is making a lot of money, it's driving some other businesses which you don't necessarily associate with the creative industry. And I think it was you who pointed out that many of the creative types really don't want to be concerned with mundane bookkeeping, but that mundane bookkeeping is required to excite the owners of capital.
Which is why you need those partnerships
Right.
I was talking about, because I think the partnership between those business people who speak the language of finance, most creatives cannot talk to a banker because they're just speaking two different languages and the two will never meet. So you have to help them, but they have to be trainable, coachable, willing to listen as well. But you have got to bring in somebody who understands finance, because if you want to scale business, you have to have financial backing.
Now, I want to ask over here, what do you think is the potential for the creative economy to support Jamaica's future economic transformation, diversification, resilience building?
Well,
is the creative industry, do you see it as something beyond, you know, maybe a little shaggy here, a little this there, pasa? I mean, can it be a serious driver of economic activity?
From my perspective, in answering your question, let's look at the most common basic aspect of our society in terms of what drives the base of our society. And I'm sure in your answer, you'll find the creative industries. In any international conversation, you'll find persons expressing the fact that as Caribbean people, as Jamaicans, we're quite entrepreneurial, we're quite innovative, we are resilient. Those are the words that describe, you know, what we do, whether it be through the arts and culture, whatever it is. And have we really, as individuals, look and assess what that really means to us? What does that mean to the growth of Jamaica? And I think if we answer that question clearly, we'll see that it is quite significant to whatever aspect of society we try to grow. If we move the finance sector, it requires innovation, it requires creativity, in this current landscape that we're operating in.
So I think you've just hit on something, that we shouldn't restrict our notion of the creative industry to just sports or music, that it is much broader.
Yeah.
It could be, software development, all of, right.
Nice category.
And each would have different challenges. But the fundamental is that somehow that innate skill has to be married with capital. And the question that we're going to have to leave here with this evening, because I think we're about out of time, is, we start to focus on how can we build these bridges which allow the industry to move to, the industries, I should say, to move to a much higher level, and a level where the world is the market and not just Jamaica.
Or position on what the government should be doing in the process. What I've seen is that the government's role is more coordination. Why? I think it facilitates a lot of trust from the relevant players of, why we're doing this. It is actually going somewhere. It is more sustainable when it's led on by the government. So that's something that I think is significant for us to understand. And I think the government coordinating the space allows for the different translation of finance to a creative and vice versa, to get everybody in one mindset around the direction that we're going. And I think
okay,
that's yeah.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I think we have to wrap it up here. But just in summarizing, I think the financiers or people with capital have to, there needs to be a realization that there are monetary opportunities in the creative industry, and people in creative industry who need this capital have to realize that there needs to be this bridge. So going forward, we have to try and figure out how to marry these reluctant partners. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your patience. Good evening. Have to realize that. So going forward, we have to figure out how to marry reluctant partners. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your patience.
Food for thought. Please give them another round of applause, please. Colleagues, thank you all very much for joining us this morning. Till now, we are at the end of what I hope was a personally and professionally impactful experience. We hope you have been capacitated to go an extra mile further in doing our part to meet the Sustainable Development Goals. Please give yourselves a round of applause as we invite Dr. Kaniel to do the vote of thanks. Thank you.
Very, very briefly, thank you. So I have to thank, of course, UE for hosting us. Special thanks, of course, to our distinguished speakers. Jean, really, it was an inspiring, really inspiring. Of course, we'll also reach out to our friend Elliott. Thank you so much to Jerry also for helping out the panelists. You were incredible. Friends, this is the beginning of a discussion. We've heard from the best in the world and the best in Jamaica. We understand that we can actually make progress on these goals, and we're hoping to be able to build on the discussions we've had today. I do want to take one more minute to introduce the real force behind all of this. I want to bring my team over here. First, your MC, which has been great. Jermaine, thank you so much for an incredible job. These guys have worked tirelessly to make sure that we had an event we're all proud of. I'm seeing Shelly over there. Thank you so very much for your dedication to this. And of course, Max, would you please stand up? Incredible people. And I don't see Morgan. There you are. And our team leader and strategist, Morgan, thank you so much. You put so much effort into this. And I don't see Deborah. We're a very small team, but I have to tell you, I've been doing this for 20 years, and this is really the best team a resident coordinator can ever hope for. Thank you so much, guys, for all your effort. Please enjoy the rest of your evening. Good luck. Don't see Morgan. There you are. And our team leader and strategist, Morgan, thank you so much. You put so much effort into this. And I don't see Deborah. We're a very small team, but I have to tell you, I've been doing this for 20 years. And this is really the best team. Thank you so much, guys, for all your effort. Please enjoy the rest of your